1971, a 22-year-old man in Columbus, Ohio bought a 1969 Chevelle SS 396 with 11 months of saved wages and drove it off a used lot on a Tuesday afternoon. He did not take the highway home. He took the long way, windows down, engine talking, because he understood, without having the language for it, that something important had just happened. He did not know he would still own that car 53 years later. He did not know it would outlast 2 marriages, 4 jobs, a war he came back from differently than he left, and a country that changed so thoroughly it sometimes felt like a foreign place. He just knew the car was his. What he could not have known then was what that possession would eventually mean. Not to him the young man, but to him the old one. Something else was already being decided that Tuesday afternoon. Something that had nothing to do with the car. When people see an older man with a muscle car, a 1968 Mustang Fastback kept in a climate-controlled garage, a 1970 Chevelle that has never had a body panel replaced, a Pontiac Guito with original paint that still turns heads on a Saturday morning, the assumption is nostalgia, sentiment. A man who cannot let go of the past because the past was better. This is not wrong, exactly, but it is not the whole picture. It is not even the most interesting part of the picture. The car is not really about the past. It is about the self. It is about a question that every person who has ever lived long enough must eventually answer. Who am I, underneath everything that has been added and subtracted and rearranged over the decades? The muscle car is not an antique. It is a biographical anchor. The men who are now in their late 60s and 70s came of age inside a very specific cultural moment, one that has never been reproduced and probably cannot be. The years between roughly 1964 and 1972 were, among other things, a period of extraordinary automotive ambition aimed directly at young men with modest incomes. The muscle car was not designed for the wealthy. It was designed to be affordable and violent and beautiful all at once, accessible to a factory worker's son who had been waiting tables or swinging a hammer or putting in night shifts at a plant. The automakers understood their customer. They understood that a young man needs to feel powerful in a world that has not yet granted him power, and they built something that delivered exactly that feeling in exchange for a manageable monthly payment. For many of these men, the car was the first expensive, chosen thing they ever owned. Not inherited, not borrowed, chosen, paid for with their own labor, on their own terms. Psychologists who study identity development use a concept called narrative identity, a framework developed most extensively by the researcher Dan McAdams at Northwestern University. The idea is that a person does not experience their life as a collection of disconnected events. They experience it as a story, with a coherent protagonist, recurring themes, and a felt sense of continuity across time. We are not just people who have memories. We are the story those memories tell. And certain objects, McAdams and others have noted this, become what might be called narrative anchors. Physical objects that hold the story in place. Objects that, when you see them or touch them or sit inside them, return you to the emotional core of who you were before the world began editing you. For a generation of men who were 22 in 1969, the muscle car is not merely a possession from that era. It is a physical sentence from their own autobiography. This is not sentimentality. It is something closer to identity maintenance, the quiet, lifelong work of keeping a thread of continuity intact between the person you are now and the person you were when you first felt fully yourself. There is something else operating here, something more specific to the generation in question. The men who came of age in the late 1960s lived through a sequence of losses that is difficult to overstate. The assassination of leaders they believed in, a war that devoured their classmates and returned them altered, an economy that began contracting just as they were trying to enter it. The oil crisis of 1973 ended the muscle car era in a single economic season. The horsepower dropped, the designs softened, and the cars that had defined their adolescence were simply discontinued, as if by committee. The cultural moment that had validated their taste, their identity, and their sense of power was closed without ceremony. Many of them kept the car they already owned, not because they were being stubborn, because they were being loyal to something that the world had abandoned before they were ready to abandon it. This is not about the car. It is about a refusal to let external forces rewrite your interior story without your consent. The pivot that happens in the lives of men who have kept these cars for decades is worth examining slowly. Over time, the car stops being just a car and begins functioning as what object relations theorists, psychologists who study how humans form emotional bonds with physical things, call a transitional object. The concept was originally applied to children and their blankets and stuffed animals, those objects that help a child maintain a felt sense of security when the world feels uncertain. But research in adult psychology has extended the insight considerably. Adults form similarly structured bonds with certain objects, not because they are childish, but because the human need for felt continuity never fully outgrows the mechanisms that served it first. The muscle car, for these men, has become something that holds the self steady across decades of change. It is the object that was there before the divorce and after, before the career ended and after, before the children became strangers to them for a season and after. Men who hold on to things, cars, tools, houses, friendships, tend to hold on with the same muscle across every domain. The researcher who keeps a 40-year-old car is usually also the man who stayed in the difficult marriage through the season when leaving would have been easier. The man who still calls his oldest friend from high school, even though their lives have nothing in common anymore. This is not nostalgia as weakness. It is loyalty as a practiced discipline. The car trained a capacity that then expressed itself in everything else. There is a cultural dimension to all of this that deserves acknowledgement. The world has not been kind to the sentimental in recent decades. The consumer economy does not reward attachment. It rewards replacement. The entire logic of modern markets depends on people not keeping things, not keeping cars, not keeping phones, not keeping relationships that require repair rather than replacement. The man who has had the same car since 1971 is, in the most literal sense, a quiet act of economic resistance. He is refusing to be enrolled in the system that needs him to need new things. Whether or not he frames it that way, the behavior carries that meaning. Every year the car stays in the garage, the argument is being made that something made with intention and maintained with care is worth more than whatever is currently being sold. To the people who pass the car at a weekend show and allow themselves only a moment of mild curiosity before moving on, it looks like a hobby. To the man who has spent 5 decades of Saturdays under the hood of the same engine, it looks like something closer to a philosophy of life. That his philosophy is expressed through carburetors and sheet metal and chrome trim rather than through language does not make it less serious. It makes it more honest. He is not telling you what he believes. He is showing you 40 years at a time. The man from Columbus, the 22-year-old who drove home the long way in 1971, is in his mid-70s now. He moves more slowly around the car than he once did. The knuckles are stiffer. The light in the garage in the early morning looks the same as it always did. He runs his hand across the hood before he drives it, not because it needs checking, but because the gesture itself means something to him now that he cannot quite put into words. He is not thinking about the past when he does it. He is, for a moment, not divided between who he was and who he became. He is, for a moment, simply continuous. What people keep when they could easily let go is the truest answer any of us will ever give to the question of who we are.